And welcome into Pressbox Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of Pressbox and PressboxOnline.com. With me is my co-host on these Thursday night excursions into the world of newsmakers and the world of sports. That's Gary Stein. Gary, how are you?
Ready to talk some football, Stanley. How about you?
We're going to talk some football with the one man in town who may have less hair than the two of us combined, Gary, and that is the Baltimore Ravens beat writer for The Athletic, or they're going to call it the New York Times Athletic. That's Jeff Zrebiec. Jeff, first of all, thanks for doing this. And secondly, I know how hard everybody at The Athletic has worked over these past 3-4 years. It must be a big sigh of relief to really know that The Athletic has really made it and is going to continue to make it, purchased by the New York Times for some ungodly sum. But congratulations on that. Your comments.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. It's always good to join you guys. And, it's exciting. When I left the Baltimore Sun 3 or 4 years ago, you're taking a little bit of a risk. You just don't know. And certainly it's a tough environment out there for media and journalism companies. But, one thing The Athletic stands for, they stand on its work, the kind of reporting and writing that's done. And it's always been all about writing and reporting and keeping it simple like that. And that's what so attracted me. And, I'm certainly glad the New York Times saw the value in that. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the partnership and this continuing.
Will content change at all? Do you anticipate any kind of substantive change of point of view or anything?
I really don't. The Athletic's going to be a separate entity. Obviously the New York Times company owns it now, but our CEOs are staying on. They're still in charge of it, and really it's business as usual for us. Just continue to write and tell good stories and do all that, which is the exciting part. Now you never know, what kind of changes could happen going forward, but at this point, it's just keep doing a good job and, business as usual, which is good.
All right, let's talk some Baltimore Ravens football, and I'll pass it over to Gary Stein. I'll give him a little lateral and let him ask the first couple questions. Gary?
Thank you. So, Jeff, first of all, congratulations, as Stan was just talking about. But, this Ravens season, Jeff, I mean, if we look back on it, and, you could probably say this about a lot of seasons in the past, but I think the combination of hope and confidence at the beginning of the year was quickly replaced as the season went on by frustration and, anger, perhaps even, depending on how you view football. But just a little overall on what you saw from the Ravens this year, and also a comment on how far or how close away do you think they are to being more successful?
Yeah, Gary, it's always good to join you and talk to you. I can't really, obviously I've never, really covered a season like this. Now, there's been seasons where, the challenges were a little bit different. I think we all remember the Ray Rice season and what that was like from an off the field factor. And every week it was something different. This was different in its own way, but kind of had challenges of just every week. It was like you showed up at practice wondering, who's not going to be out there, who's not going to be out there this week. And even uplifting wins were sort of marred by, okay, who got hurt in this game that the Ravens aren't going to have for the rest of the season possibly. And, I'll never forget, on the eve of the first practice, I got a call from somebody, an agent actually saying, hey, you might want to check the status of the quarterback. And I said, huh? I mean, and, as it turned out in their first team meeting, John Harbaugh announced that, Lamar Jackson was going to be starting the season on the COVID list. And, I kind of had to sit on that. At The Athletic, we're not allowed to report. We're still not allowed to report positive COVID tests or vaccination status or any of that unless it's addressed on the record. And the Ravens weren't ready to kind of come out with it yet. But the point in that was it just seemed to be something, and it just went from there, and illnesses and injuries, and there just seemed to be a black cloud around the team all year. And there were temporarily moments of bliss and excitement. There's not too many wins more memorable than when they came back to beat the Colts, and then when they, in the fourth quarter, when they finally got over that Kansas City Chiefs hump. But to me, Gary, they just ran out of gas. I think everybody knew they weren't going to be able to win that way the whole season. At some point, that was going to catch up to you. It was just the recipe was unsustainable. And then the injuries kind of kept coming. And then I think, Lamar Jackson's injury was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and they just really weren't able to recover. So, yeah, it's incredibly disappointing. I mean, we all know the reasons for it. I don't think people need to, exit this season and say, look, they're far away from being a contender. I don't believe that. They were competitive with some of the top teams in the league with, a watered down version of their roster. But I also don't think you can just chalk it up to saying, okay, it's all on the injuries. Let's run it back and we're going to be fine. A, every year you're going to deal with injuries. And B, they need to figure out the offensive regression that we were seeing even before Lamar Jackson's injury. But, I think there's going to be a lot of motivated people there, Gary. I think the defense is going to get overhauled this offseason. I would fully expect. I think the quarterback is a fascinating story this offseason. What happens to his contract? What does he do to improve? How does he bounce back? But there's plenty of reasons to feel good if you're a Raven fan. I mean, they're going to be right there, but they certainly need to do some things to make sure of that.
It's just so interesting because in the NFL, being right there is still a major step away. I don't think that anybody can imagine the Ravens competing with the Bengals and the Chiefs and the Bills in the playoffs this year. But, Jeff, before I send it over to Stan, I just wanted to ask you, now that you're talking about Lamar, I want to compare his contract situation and perhaps contrast it to that of Joe Flacco in the Super Bowl year. That year, basically, the Ravens said, show me to Joe Flacco before they signed him to a long-term extension and made him the highest paid quarterback in the league. Is it true that the Ravens tried to sign Lamar this year and were basically rebuffed by his mother, I guess, for lack of a better person, and they want to see what's going to happen next year?
Yeah, in a sense, they tried to sign Joe Flacco. It was more Flacco didn't like the offers that I'm going to bet on myself. And they were kind of flummoxed by it, or like, really, Joe, we're offering you generational wealth here. And we all knew from covering Joe that he was his own man and he made his decisions and bet on himself. And the rest is history. To be quite perfectly frank, Gary, it's the weirdest kind of thing. One of the weirdest things I've ever covered in terms of the whole contract negotiations, because no one even knows who's negotiating it. Right. We know Eric DeCosta is dealing with it, obviously. I mean, he's been upfront about that. And, but I don't think Lamar's mom's even allowed to negotiate the deal. I think it has to be an advisor or Lamar or, so I really am not quite sure how advanced they are. I know they've had talks. And I know there's been a report somewhere that, and I think it's Kadri said it, that he rejected a deal. I mean, I'm sure they've talked about deals at different points, and obviously there's one not done. I thought it was a no-brainer. I thought it was an absolutely stone cold lock at one point that he'd get an extension this offseason. If I'm a betting man, I still think it happens, but I don't say that with a whole lot of confidence. I mean, there's a lot that's come up in the last 3-4 months that kind of makes you wonder, that forces you to ask some questions. And look, I don't think it's an ideal situation, but you have this year on the 5th-year option. He has a $23 million cap hit. That's high, but it's going to be high. He's a franchise quarterback. And you can always have the franchise tag the following year. So there's ways to keep this going without, giving him a deal that's going to probably look like $40 million a year type deal. I mean, if you're the Ravens, you have to, when you give someone that kind of money, you have to have some concern about what we've seen over the last 3 months. So I would love to be a fly in the wall in those negotiations. And it is it's a franchise defining decision. It really is.
It is an amazing decision. Hey, I've congratulated you tonight on a few things, and Gary has as well. I also congratulate you on asking a question of John Harbaugh the other day that elicited a response that was, I just at times I couldn't get over how many new terms that John Harbaugh alluded to, that the team, you asked him a question about the offense and whether Greg Roman's definitely going to be back. How do you feel? Why do you feel he's still the right guy? And I saw that the Ravens were the third best offense in football on 3 and outs.
Yeah.
I never knew that they did that. I saw that they get a lot of empty yards. Our called run game, that's a term I've never heard before. Our called run game. Why isn't it just the run game? Then we were 7th, I think, in the league in yards before contact. And it just goes on and on. It was long and it was a never-ending road. I'll try and be more succinct. Are they enraptured with new terminology because of the quote-unquote analytics? Is that part of what drives their offensive thinking now, Jeff?
Well, yeah, I think there's certainly different things they're looking at, but I think some of the way he answered the question, Stan, was a way to kind of not throw anybody under the bus and not really, like, look, the yards after contact pretty much tells the story, right? I mean, there were holes, but they just didn't have the running backs to break tackles and run away from tackles. And I think that's what John was saying. They just lacked the explosiveness in the running game, and he didn't really want to be that specific because it looks like a shot at Latavius Murray and Devonta Freeman and those guys. And then the called running game, obviously, I like that he differentiated it because you have a lot of people saying, oh, they finished 3rd in the league in rushing, rushing yards per game. And that they did. But if you look at it and you take away Lamar Jackson's run and so it seemed like the only way they were getting anything going was scrambling. And it's not just Lamar, it was Tyler Huntley too. I mean, it seemed like so many of their rushing yards were coming on scrambles and not even called runs. So that was his kind of way of differentiating that. I wanted to, he alluded to in the previous question that Greg Roman was coming back, but he didn't quite say it. Yeah, and honestly, so I wanted to ask him directly on it. And honestly, Stan, I wasn't exactly. I thought it was a little tepid in him saying he was going to return.
I agree totally. He said nothing's a lock.
Yeah, and now I know you can't guarantee something. There's 8 or 9. Well, not anymore, but. There's a lot of jobs still out there. And, I even wondered if Jim Harbaugh took the Minnesota job, would he come to John and say, look, you took Mike Macdonald. How about I get Greg Roman, and the Greg Roman calling an offense with Dalvin Cook is a pretty interesting, scenario there. So, but no, so yeah, I wanted to definitely get him on the record to say, he's coming back. But if you look at all his answer in that question, Stan, compared to whenever last few years when he's been asked about Greg Roman, it was much less of an endorsement than we've seen. And then he went on to kind of talk about, he went on to look more at different stuff of what he saw as the problems with the offense and sort of laid it out. I mean, you could almost written a story off that one response. Well, you couldn't almost. You could have easily written a whole story off that one response.
The other response that I found interesting, too, and this goes back to about 8 or 10 years ago when my nephew, the actor Josh Charles, began to be a little bit friendly with Eric and Harbaugh and Bisciotti. And then my brother got friendly with Bisciotti, and I'm not giving away a big, dark secret here, that Bisciotti is fond of saying that he likes to expedite the inevitable. And I look at that, I remembered that phrase, it stuck in my head. And I know that Harbaugh, when asked about Wink Martindale, said, I like to use wise counsel. And we've got a lot of wise counsel here. I'm not so sure if left to his own devices that Harbaugh would have made the Wink Martindale move. I have a feeling it was more not pushed on him, but they explained their point of view mightily to him, how they think it was time to move on from him.
I agree with you, Stan, 100%. I mean, you can't not look at the factors here. Look, Don Martindale had been in all their meetings after the season. He had been in planning meetings. He was in the building every day. He was talking to John. And I don't know if he was guaranteed everything, but he certainly wasn't told he was gone. I mean, Harbaugh that decision came down 10 or 11 days after the season, I think it was. And coincidentally, when John was in the Bahamas, meeting with DaCosta and Bisciotti and having their, organizational summit. And then there's the whole element, like, technically he still could have come back. Like, originally there was an offer, and they, John doesn't want any of his coaches to be lame duck coaches, right? He doesn't want them 1 year. So there was a contract offer to Wink Martindale, but it wasn't much of extension. It was more of a kind of what they call rollover year, where your contract could roll over, but we're going to decide if it does. So, I mean, you knew Wink wasn't going to really be amenable to those terms anyway, but there was an option for him just to coach out this year. He's making a good bit of money this year, and just say, okay, I'll be a coaching free agent next year. But they chose to go in another direction. I think there was some stuff about Martindale that, John accepted, John worked through, and I don't think Bisciotti and Eric DaCosta were crazy about it. I think we all know by now a Bisciotti type, and that's kind of the CEO looking fit, the all business. It's kind of like Mike Macdonald. I mean, we're just,
yeah.
And I don't think Wink was ever that type. I mean, I don't think, Rex Ryan was ever that type for Steve Bisciotti, and kind of Wink's kind of like that. So I think there was already a couple strikes going against Wink. And then, I have no doubt in my mind, if Bisciotti and Eric wanted Wink to be the defensive coordinator, I believe he would have been. Now, I'm not saying they forced John's hand at all. I don't want to say they dictated the decision. Right. I think it was a collaborative process, but I think they were very much on board with the decision.
Yeah.
So looking and acting like a CEO aside for a minute, okay? You had all the injuries to the defense this year. Do you think Martindale should have adjusted and maybe played some too high safety a little more? He just seemed to just say, hey, look, we blitz. That's who we are. We're coming after you. It doesn't matter who's back there. I'm going zero cover, and that's it. Like, do you think his intransigence was the reason, football-wise?
I think there were a couple games earlier in the season probably where he was too stubborn. But I think later in the season, I mean, if you look at their blitz numbers, they were down significantly this year. I think they were fourth maybe in the NFL in blitzing. They were the top 5, but they've owned that category for like 2 or 3 straight years, and it hasn't even been close. This year there was, multiple teams that blitzed more than them. So I think they kind of later in the season, when they were rolling out kind of a practice squad defensive backfield, he got away from the blitz and was a little more, was adjusting a little bit more. I mean, look, it's hard, really, and I don't want to, I do think Wink kind of caught a little bit of a bad rap. I mean, what did they do well defensively? And I know he's the coach, but they didn't tackle particularly well. When they started losing corners, they didn't cover particularly well. They didn't get pressure on from their front 4 really well. I think Wink was kind of hamstrung in a lot of ways, Gary. I mean, there's almost so much you can do. Yeah, you can scheme pressure. And if you look at where the Ravens ranked on third down, it was very good. They were very good third down defense, and that's because they schemed pressure, and his blitzes would get home at times, or at least the threat of his blitzes, affected other teams on third down. So, and they stopped the run. They're the number 1 run defense in the league. And I think that's a little, I don't want to say, I mean, teams didn't really need to run because they figured they could pass.
It's a little misleading.
So, yeah, it's a little misleading, but they held up pretty well against the run. They were good on third downs. I think they did some good things. I just think, and I do think there were times early in the season, to call the cover 0 blitz and leave Chris Westry on his own in Chicago. I mean, that, Tyler Huntley with that late drive kind of bailed them out there, but that would have been a way bigger story, that decision, if they didn't win that game. So there were incidents, I would agree with you, Gary, but I felt as the season got on, he was mixing things up a little more. I mean, look, they employed a strategy against the Chiefs with the late pressure on Mahomes that other teams adopted. Yeah. The way they covered Devonta Adams, other teams adopted. I mean, They clearly, I thought, did some creative things at times, but I think they were a little bit outmanned, and they really didn't have the personnel to play the way that once the injuries hit, they didn't really have the personnel to play the way that Wink would prefer, I'm sure.
Do you, before the Ravens go out and get whoever they're going to get in the draft or via free agency, et cetera, I'm talking about defense, who do you see on the roster this year that had a limited role that could perhaps step up next year that the Ravens would expect some, movement in their career?
That's a great question. He winded up playing more than they wanted. I think Brandon Stevens is a legitimate piece. I really do. And all the talk was, the Ravens reached on him. I don't think he's a natural safety. I don't think that's his best role. And once Deshaun Elliott got injured, they needed him to play there. I thought Brandon Stevens really played some good games towards the end. He was clearly an ascending player. I think if you can use him more in matchup, Gary, and move him around, occasionally have him on the tight end, move him closer to the line of scrimmage, I think he's a really nice piece. I wouldn't want him as a starting safety. I think they need to do something there. But as far as that role, which is a very key role now in the NFL, I think that's key. I think he's a nice piece going forward. I think, Owe is a piece, obviously. He's going to be a guy. I know he played a lot, but and Matabike is going to continue, but man, they've had some offensive heavy drafts. I don't want to say the cupboard's bare because it's not, but they have issues at every level of defense. You look at the defensive line and who do you put your hat on? Okay, Matabike, I don't think he's broken out like everyone had hoped, but I think you'll be comfortable with him as a starter. You look at outside linebacker, it's Owe and who? Bowser is a torn Achilles. You don't know what you could hope he's ready for week 1, but you can't bank on it. I think we all learned a lesson about banking on players coming on major injuries this year. Ferguson at this point, that door is pretty much shut. And then you go and, inside linebacker and Patrick Queen's going to be a starter going forward, but I don't know if he's your starting every down middle linebacker going forward. We just haven't seen, maybe Mike Macdonald really reaches him. But I think they need a veteran alongside him. And then you go into the corners and, you'll Jimmy Smith will likely retire. Tavon Young's a strong candidate for a cap cut, unless he takes probably a pay cut. Westry's a restricted free agent. Avertt's probably gone, and the safety Elliott's probably gone. So, wow, I would think it's going to be a heavy defensive draft and free agency this year in Baltimore. The good news is they saw a lot of guys play this year. Well, that's the good and bad news, but the cupboard's not bare, but they have a lot of work to do on that side of the ball.
I know he's not a big piece, but what did you see out of Tony Jefferson? I thought he looked pretty good and could kind of refill the Jimmy Smith role now.
First of all, Tony Jefferson, and all the time I've, covering the Orioles and, the Ravens. Now I've been covering the Ravens since 2011, covered the Orioles for about 6-7 years before that. Tony Jefferson's absolutely one of the favorite guys I've ever dealt with. He's a superhuman being, hardworking guy, great team guy. Love the guy. So my first reaction was how awesome of it is to see him back out playing again. I was talking to Eric Weddle at one point last year, and this was when Tony Jefferson was sort of in, I don't want to say football exile, but he wasn't really getting opportunities. And Weddle told me a story that he was, they live near each other in Southern California, and he started having Tony Jefferson over for pickup basketball games. That's Weddle's big thing. That's what they credited for him staying in shape to do what he's doing now. And he said you could just tell Tony Jefferson did not have confidence in his knee. He was just kind of being real tentative, and slowly but surely he sort of got it back. And I think the biggest thing you saw out of him was just the pride and energy in playing. He brought energy to that team. He tackled well. I forgot, they're all mixing together, but about a week ago, I think it was, Anthony Levine Sr. retired. I think Jefferson would be a great Anthony Levine going forward, as like a number 3 safety. You can play him close to the line of scrimmage. You can play him on all special teams. I would like to see them resign. I'm sure he'd love it. He loved it here. And, one last story about Jefferson, when he was a starting safety here, he didn't play special teams, but yet he went to every special teams meeting because he wanted to be ready in case he had to play. And he loved being around football. And he was always one of the first guys on the field for, some of these guys trickle out, before, they don't come out until after the special teams portion of practice. Tony Jefferson was always on the field for the start of special teams practice because he loved it. So just a great guy to have around. I know they consider him a Raven. I would love to see him get that done. He wouldn't cost a whole lot. Yeah. I don't think you plug him into a starting safety role and say, okay, we're good. But I think he's a nice, versatile piece to have defensively and on special teams.
I would agree. Let's scoot over to the offensive line. That's a real mess, isn't it, going into next season? I hate to say it that way. You're still not going to have great confidence in Ronnie Stanley.
No.
Obviously they're going to need a new center. Where do you start there? Piece it together.
Yeah. I mean, we're sitting here and
maybe Marshall Yonda.
Obviously, free agency is about, still well over a month away, but you look at it and there's only really one spot you can count on, and that's Zeitler at right guard.
Yeah.
I think you're happy. I like the McCary signing because, at best, I think you have him as a swing tackle or a swing. As your 6th offensive lineman where he can step in and play all 5 offensive line spots. That's a hugely valuable guy to have. If you have to start him at right tackle, I think you can live with it. I don't think it's ideal, but I think he's serviceable there. And he's a tough dude. He'll embrace whatever role he has. Very valuable guy. The question, I think at left guard, you can't keep drafting these guys in the 3rd and 4th round and just draft another guy over them. I mean, they did it to Ben Powers. Then they're doing it to Tyree Phillips. Then if they do that again this year, they're doing it to Ben Cleveland. And it's just like, we never really find out if these guys can play. And I mean, they like Tyree Phillips as a guard. Too often they've needed him at tackle. So I think if you just say, we're not moving him, there's no way we're moving him tackle, that's where he plays. I think there's a left guard there between whether it's him or whether it's Ben Cleveland. I mean, at some point you have to let Ben Cleveland play too. He's a 3rd round pick. So I don't know that you put a priority on a guard. I think the 2 questions are tackle depth and center. And look, Bradley Bozeman wants to be here, Stan. Yeah. He's wanted to be here. They've put pressure on the
kid. He's a great kid.
Great kid. They put pressure on the Ravens to try to get this deal done. They've been pursuing it since the summer, and they're just, I haven't asked recently, but as of a couple of weeks ago, it wasn't looking good, I should say. And the closer you get to free agency, we know the drill, the more likely it goes. So I can't imagine they have enough confidence in Tristan Colon to be a starting center. I mean, I don't think they mind if as the top backup and a guy that has to play a little bit, but it would be hard to say they've really upgraded the offensive line if he's your starting center come week 1. So I think they have to figure that out. I mean, maybe Ryan Jensen comes back on a reasonable deal. We know they're going to spend on 1 or 2 free agents. They're not going to spend on a lot. But they'll have one decent sized expenditure where they go out and get somebody they feel like they need to fill a hole. We also know there's an Iowa kid that's a 1st round center where, right around the 14th where they're drafting, he's kind of his happy zone where people figure he may go off. Eric DeCosta is one of his good friends is Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. So there's an option there. And then the tackle depth, I think it's their number 1 need. I mean, you just can't play this game again every year where you don't know who's going to be your tackle. Now, best case scenario is Ronnie Stanley's ready to go. And then Juwan James, who you signed, is ready to play right tackle. You got Patrick McCary as your swing guy. You draft a young tackle and you feel really good about your tackle situation. But how do I think Juwan James has played 3 games in 3 years. You can't count on him. You can't. Yeah, you can. Anything you get out of him has to be a positive. And at this point, Ronnie Stanley has played 1 game in the year and a half. You can't bank on him either. I mean, even last time I talked to Ronnie Stanley, even he acknowledges he can't be sure he's going to play again, or come anywhere close to the level he was at. So, they need to find they need to do something at tackle there. There's no question, Stan. I think they have the makings of a decent offensive line, like depth. Like, I don't think they need depth there. I think they need to solidify center, and they need to get a starting option at tackle. And the rest, if everything fills in, it could look pretty good, but you're banking on a lot of, as our old friend Buck Showalter used to say, you're banking on a lot of what ifs,
That's true. Gary, you got one more, and then I'll wrap it up for Jeff Zrebiec.
Yeah. What's the salary cap situation like, Jeff, as we speak?
Yeah, it's not great, but it's not, they're kind of in the middle of the road where they have some flexibility, and they're going to get more. I mean, look, I don't think anybody foresees Villanueva coming back. I think Tavon Young is probably going to have to, if he comes back, he's going to have to take what they call a haircut, a pay cut, or he may be gone whatsoever, all sold. There's a couple other guys that you could save some money to add to it, but they're going to have to be choosy too. I don't think they're going to be totally up against the cap where they can't do anything, but they're not going to be able to, they're not going to be big spenders in free agency. I don't think they want to be, but they don't just have that kind of cap to do it. I mean, that's where Lamar comes in too, Gary. I mean, you don't get that deal and he's on the hook for $23 million. You get that deal and you could open up an additional $9 or $10 million of salary cap space, and you can get 2 starters with that kind of money, and I'll add Derek Wolfe as another guy who they have a decision to make. So yeah, it's there's going to be a lot of decisions they have to make. I mean, this is a fascinating offseason on every level, and it'll be very curious. They got a young guy, Nick Matteo, who's, he's kind of taken the Pat Moriarty role from the past. He's viewed in a lot of circles as a future GM. They hired him from the league office. Very up and coming guy. He's going to earn his money this offseason, trying to balance that salary cap and help work with Pat and Eric and Ozzie and John to really improve that roster.
I've got one last question for you about the quarterback, and the contract aside, were you happy? I know the team was 8-3, but starting with that Dolphin game, I didn't see Lamar as the same player after that game. It's clear that other teams started doing exactly what the Dolphins did, which was blitzing him tremendously. Where do you think he is in his evolution as a player?
He was playing as well as he ever has. And then, just and there was a couple games maybe, before, like he didn't play very well in that Bengals game at home, right, which preceded the Dolphins game. There's a couple other games where his level was dropping a little. Now it was a one-man show early in the season. I mean, he was phenomenal. So I think he knew that wasn't going to happen all season. But I didn't expect the decline to be so steep. And look, we live in a town where, and this isn't everybody, but a large portion of the fan base is, when the Ravens offense is a good game, it's Lamar played great. When the offense has a bad game, it's Roman did a terrible job. There's some people that can't wrap their head around the fact that Lamar Jackson has a hand in some of their offensive issues. Yeah. And when I saw later in the year, they beat the blitz several times with Tyler Huntley, and see how Tyler Huntley handled the blitz. And other than the one game, I think it was the Packers game, guys, but Tyler Huntley was getting them out of the huddle quicker and making decisive calls
that's a great point.
It was a night and day, the rhythm of the offense. It was moving so much quicker. Now, I think Tyler Huntley by the season's end got exposed a little, and you saw that, this guy's probably better suited for a backup, and the more people saw him, the more that became clear. But he did some things that they were clearly struggling with, that Lamar was clearly struggling with, that really accentuated some of the issues Lamar was having. So he'll never admit to it. It just looked like he lost some confidence. I don't know if it was the illness was lingering or the injuries. He just didn't. He missed more practices this year than any guy who was never on IR I can remember. He never went to IR. I mean, there'd be years at a time before we ever saw Joe Flacco miss a practice, before some of the, the back stuff he had, and then of course the knee. But, he's just, I think that not having the practice time caught up to him. I think the illness has caught up to him. This is a huge season for him to get right, to get his health back, to go to work on some things that he clearly struggled with. Everybody has a hand in it, and Greg Roman too. And I'm not absolving him.
Right.
But some of their issues were directly Lamar's issues. And while he was winning games almost single-handedly for them early in the season, and he deserves credit for that, you also, he's the quarterback. He's going to get some blame, and he should, because his level dropped in a lot of ways. He wasn't seeing the field, just not making smart decisions. It kind of like fell off a cliff, his level. I mean, you look at that Browns game, they won at home, and some of those decisions he was making, he looked like a rookie quarterback again with no experience, and he's so much better than that. But this kid is really competitive. He has a lot of pride. I would not be surprised, guys, if we look at that stretch as kind of, and we're talking a lot about that stretch in 2022 when we see how he's playing, because I think he'll use that to get better. He'll use that to motivate him. I think a lot of the talk about negativity surrounding him will motivate him. I think having to be on the sideline during a critical point of the season, I think he'll build on that, and he'll remember that feeling. He'll also probably remember the feeling that some fans actually thought Tyler Huntley is a better fit as a starter. So it's as I said, they need him. John Harbaugh said he's going to work right after the Super Bowl, and that needs to happen. And that's in every phase. That's, getting healthier, and that's working on his mechanics and watching film and decisions and all that. I mean, we're seeing it in the playoffs. If your quarterback doesn't have the ability to make plays, you don't stand a chance,
You've been incredibly generous with your time, but I do want to just ask one last thing.
Sure.
And Gary and I were talking earlier in the year, and you nobody's comparing Lamar to Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, but those guys get to the huddle and get out of the huddle, and their team has 13 or 14 seconds. He was repeatedly getting to the huddle and getting up to the line with no ability to really read anything. Your thoughts on how that changes?
Well, I think that's also something that Greg Roman has to address too. And I'd be lying to you if I told you I went back and looked at, that stuff's very hard to find. But in talking to people from San Francisco and from Buffalo, where Greg's called offenses, and popping it in, Googling pre-snap penalties and Greg Roman, you see it's been a problem at his other spots. So I think it's on him. They do a lot of motion. They do a lot of pre-snap misdirection. I think that's going to lead to some of those things at times, but it's just far too many. And they were in such a better rhythm at times and getting out of the huddle. And there was the one exception. I think it was the Green Bay game where they took a couple of, delay of game penalties. But it needs to be a priority to just have a greater sense of urgency. I mean, the best word I could use for Lamar during that one stretch is just a malaise. He just was the guy. What one of the things that people fall in love with him so much is just this youthful exuberance he plays in. And it's just it's not a reckless style, but it's this freelancing fun. He's having fun. He's not taking hits. He's just not. He's running around. He's making the easy throws. I mean, it's when he's on. It's just breathtaking to watch. I mean, there's nothing fun. There's nothing more fun than watching when he's on his game. But he just hit that stretch where he seemed to be confused. He seemed to be.
I don't know if we'll ever know for sure. It's getting COVID
twice. You just don't know.
A period of time might have
absolutely
something to do with it.
And again, I think missing practices every week, maybe practicing. There's weeks where he practiced maybe only once, and it was on a Friday. And anyone who's covered an NFL game week over the years knows Friday is basically a glorified walkthrough. It's not the best way to get ready for games. So, you just want to see him get that joy back and start playing with that energy again that just seemed missing this past year when he got into that kind of rough stretch.
Thank you very much for your time, Jeff. It's been a
good
pleasure
stuff,
to
Jeff.
Talk to you. Really good stuff.
Always enjoy you guys, talking to you guys. Have a good rest of the off season, and
right.
There'll be plenty to talk and write about.
He is Jeff Zrebiec from the athletic.com. You can subscribe now. They're going to be around a long, long time. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Next week, I'll be on Wednesday night with Pat Skeery, and then on Thursday night, Gary and I are going to be talking to Councilman. I've got his card right here. John Bullock, Gary, and we also
this is an interesting story.
This is the story out at Carroll Park, and we're also going to have on the president of Carroll Park Pitch and Putt Golf Club, Stephanie Williams, will join us as well. It's a story about a small group of 33 women who formed the Black Golf Club. A golfers club for women golfers. They were all black back in the 30s and 40s, and how they ended up desegregating Baltimore's golf courses. They just put a monument out there last week, and I'm really looking forward to that story.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad to be a part of that.
All right. Talk to you soon, Mr. G. Stein.
You got it,
for
man.
Stan the Fan, and I'll see you Monday night with Greg Olson and Ross Grimsley. Thanks for tuning in.